on Manischewitz. I thought that talking about black men being sexually and physically abused during slavery was a doozy. This one is in the same category. Maybe a little worse. Yeah. I don't know. I wanted to cry. I wanted to be angry. I just, to lack that kind of compassion, you have to have the heart of the devil, for real. What's bothersome is seeing how people who are new to this country, whether they are here illegally or not, seeing how they're treated. It seems they are given more resources than citizens. Then you compare it to those who were newly freed after hundreds of years. Most weren't even given moth-eaten blankets to keep them warm. When the chains fell off, prisoners of war, aka ex-slaves, simultaneously fell into severe, dire straits. Enslavers didn't bat an eye. If they stayed their asses here, chucking corn for free, they'd still be alive today. I'm sure a lot of them had that sentiment. The others who could do something about it, it seemed they could not care any less as well. Or they were more concerned about what white people would have thought than to actually help somebody that had the same blood that flowed through their veins flowed through ex-slaves' veins as well. And they would know because they helped shed a lot of it. From my perspective, I believe a lot of enslavers thought it was going to go down like this. You see, those in chains were conditioned to rely on enslavers for everything. When I say everything, I mean everything. Scanty clothing, shoes they wore, they got once a year, but they were still given shoes. Holes in the wall for shelter, they still have shelter. And the bare essentials that they had, they still got them. When physical chains were loosened, they were literally set free into a dark abyss with nothing, not a damn thing. Usually, even today, when people are released from prison, they're given something to help them begin anew. Those who were in chains got nothing except maybe the tattered, filthy clothes on their backs. It was known that many would die from starvation or be tossed into jail for vagrancy or theft. They had to steal to eat. That's when they started making up the, fabricating, saying that they came up with the huge fabrication that Negroes were thieves. Them niggers, they ain't nothing but thieves. They had to steal to eat. They couldn't rely on you. If they weren't going to work for free, you weren't going to help feed a decent person. Would at least do that much. Yes, there were slaves who, ex-slaves who were given land and, things to get them on their way. But the majority of them didn't get anything but a kick in the ass. This is what I think happened. Life after emancipation was made so bad, horrible for newly released prisoners of war that enslavers just knew they'd come crawling and running back to be their slaves again. They wanted them to work for free and still be treated as animals or worse than animals. Enslavers wanted a viable way to clear their conscience. So if the slaves came back, resumed the life they had prior to the emancipation, it would be their choice. Then enslavers can go around free of the burden of looking like a barbaric, cruel beast. Like, hey, they came back. They wanted to work for us. Obviously, slavery wasn't that bad. They came back. Some free ex-slaves chose to stay and help their enslavers. Enslavers would promise them a wage and wouldn't give them anything. But the majority got on and never looked back, no matter how difficult it became. They rather starved and perished on their feet than at the ruthless hands of those good old Americans who bought and sold mankind like animals. Those cold-hearted people have to answer to God for every foul thing they did. And if you don't believe in God, you don't think he exists, don't worry about it. You're going to answer for everything you did and didn't do too. The thing about it, whether you believe in God or not, it doesn't change his existence. He exists on his own, not by your thoughts. I would hate to live in this world and not know for certain what's going to happen when it ends or when my life ends, and walk around with this arrogant, narcissistic, childlike mentality. And then when you're on your bed, on that deathbed, about to take your last breath, then it's like, now you want to rethink things. In 2015, I was talking to a black police officer. I can't remember how or why our paths crossed. He nonchalantly revealed something to me. He said that all black people will be eliminated in 5 years. He said this to me in 2015. He said it to me like he wasn't black. Then homeboy had the nerve to ask me out. Of course, that was a hard pass. Not just because of what he said to me, but, you know, I'm a little nervous when it comes to military men and cops. They've witnessed too much that our psyche wasn't designed to see. And sometimes when you overload your mind, you can snap. And I know some were saying, that's not just military men and cops. It's not them that just snap. It's the other men. You know, a garbage man can snap. Okay, well, I'm not talking about a man who collects garbage. I'm not talking about a CEO or a lawyer. I'm talking about police officers and military. That's my proclivity to not want to date them. If you want to date them, fine. Okay, let's go. I've often wondered what actually happened to newly freed enslaved, aka POWs, after the so-called gift of emancipation. I mean, it's not really expanded on. Some said it's not really even talked about. How did they make it after initially being freed from physical bondage? For over hundreds of years. From the time they were born, their lives were controlled from sun up to sundown, like they were ignorant children, ignorant animals. Actually, animals aren't ignorant. They're very highly intelligent. So they treated slaves like remedial animals. How did they make it after that? Most were treated cruelly while in bondage. How much worse did it actually get after emancipation? Some call it the largest biological crisis in the 19th century. Hundreds of thousands of slaves freed during the American Civil War died from disease and hunger after being liberated, according to a new book. The historian Jim Downs of Connecticut College cast a shadow over one of the most celebrated narratives of American history, which sees the freeing of the slaves as a triumphant righting of the wrongs of a southern plantation system that kept millions of black Americans in chains. You know how some of them, you can always tell a racist when they say, well, Lincoln freed you. And like, oh, okay. Freed me into what? Freed my people into what? Okay, you set them free, which they shouldn't have been in chains anyway. But you set them free, and then what? You did everything under the sun to continue to put them in invisible chains. The reality of emancipation during the chaos of war and its bloody aftermath often fell brutally short of the positive image. Instead, free slaves were often neglected by Union soldiers or faced rampant disease, including horrific outbreaks of smallpox and cholera. Many of them simply starved to death. After combing through obscure records, newspapers, and journals, Downs believes that about a quarter of the 4 million freed slaves either died or suffered from illness between 1862 and 1870. He writes in the book that it can be considered the largest biological crisis of the 19th century. And yet, it is one that has been little investigated by contemporary historians. I wonder why. The things that are just too much, too brutal, too harsh, a lot of folks like to steer away from it. You know the thing called white fragility? Where they say that white people are so fragile. That's why they like to protect them from the brutality of truth. How is it that people who are descendants, people who are so cold and so cruel, how are they so fragile? And then the ones that were put enslaved are considered to be the barbarics and the brutes and the animals. It doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense at all. Downs believes much of that is because at the time of the Civil War, which raged between 1861 and 1865 and pitted the Unionist North against the Confederate South, many people did not want to investigate the tragedy befalling the freed slaves. Many Northerners were a little more sympathetic than their Southern opponents when it came to the health of the freed slaves, and anti-slavery abolitionists feared the disaster would prove their critics right. In the 19th century, people did not want to talk about it. Still don't want to talk about it. My goodness. Damn, how many years gonna go by before people want to say, hey, let's sit down and really have a sincere conversation about this thing, the evil, wicked institution of slavery. Oh my goodness, over 400 years and nobody still want to talk about it. By the way people try to avoid this subject, that should let you know how horrible it was. And some did not care, and abolitionists, when they saw so many free people dying, feared that it proved true what some people said, that slaves were not able to exist on their own, Downs told the Observer. They weren't able to exist on their own, so to speak, because they were treated like imbeciles and made to take care of those who put them in chains, barely able to take care of themselves. They were fed and clothed just to take care of the people who enslaved them, and it had nothing to do with a slave's life. Downs' book is full of terrible descriptions about the individual experiences of slave families who embraced their freedom from the brutal plantations on which they had been born or sold to. Many ended up in encampments called contraband camps that were often near Union Army bases. However, conditions were unsanitary and food supplies limited. Shockingly, some contraband camps were actually former slave pens, meaning newly freed people ended up being kept virtual prisoners back in the same cells that had previously held them. In many such camps, disease and hunger led to countless deaths. Often the only way to leave the camp was to agree to go back to work for the same plantation from which the slaves had recently escaped. You see that? I'm speaking directly to anyone that has a conscience. It does not matter your race or ethnicity. When you hear someone flippantly say or water down slavery, if nothing raises up in you to rebuke that, I don't even see how you have a soul. Treatment by Union soldiers could also be brutal. Downs reconstructed the experiences of one freed slave. Joseph Miller had come with his wife and 4 children to a makeshift freed slave refuge camp within the Union stronghold of Camp Nielsen in Kentucky. In return for food and shelter for his family, Miller joined the army. Yet Union soldiers in 1864 still cleared the ex-slaves out of Camp Nielsen, effectively abandoning them to scavenge in a war-ravaged and disease-ridden landscape. One of Miller's young sons quickly sickened and died. 3 weeks later, his wife and another son died. 10 days after that, his daughter perished too. Finally, his last surviving child also fell terminally ill. By early 1865, Miller himself was dead. For Downs, such tales are heartbreaking. So many of these people are dying of starvation, and that is such a slow death, he said. Downs has recollected numerous shocking accounts of the lives of free slaves. He came across accounts of deplorable conditions in hospitals and refugee camps where doctors often had racist theories about how Black Americans reacted to disease and how do they act the same way, especially when it comes to Black women. People want to say things changed, and things stayed the same. Things were so bad that one military official in Tennessee in 1865 wrote that former slaves were dying by scores, that sometimes 30 per day die and are carried out by wagon loads, often coffins, and thrown promiscuously like brutes into a trench. Doesn't something bring to your mind something that just recently happened about 3 years ago? At first, it was another group of people that was just dying rapidly, and then it flipped somehow, and Black people were the ones that were dying the most, and that was very, very peculiar. So bad were the health problems suffered by free slaves, and so high the death rate that some observers of the time even wondered if they would all die out. One white religious leader in 1863 expected Black Americans to vanish, and he was a religious leader. Like his brother, the Indian of the forest, he must melt away and disappear forever from the midst of us, the man wrote. He would have loved that, and that coming from a preacher. He should have been the one praying for him and asking God to heal him and help him. You see what I'm talking about? There's a lot of people in the pulpit that are pastors in name only. They don't have any more of a relationship with God than they have a relationship with a stranger. That's what they expect. I've been saying it. I don't know if I've said it in a lot of my videos, but I might have said it in one or two videos that's what was expected of Black folks. They wasn't expected to be here this long. You know, the ones that had that severe, dark, evil hatred in their hearts, they like, damn, why are they still here? They are in awe and fear at the same time. They still here. All this we've tried to do to them, and they are still here. That's because the hand of God is on us. You better recognize before it's too late. And it probably is too late. Such racial attitudes among Northerners seem shocking, but Downs says they were coming. Yet Downs believed that his book takes nothing away from the moral value of the Emancipation. Instead, he believes that acknowledging the terrible social cost borne by the newly emancipated accentuates their heroism. This challenges the romantic narratives of emancipation. It was more complex and more nuanced than that. Freedom comes at a cost, Downs said. James Johnson, a 79-year-old ex-slave from Columbia, South Carolina, stated in his narrative that he felt and knew that years after the war was worse than before. The Emancipation Proclamation and the Union's victory in the war secured the freedom of slaves, but with a society plunged by Jim Crow laws and segregation, ex-slaves were far from liberated. Slaves paid the price for their freedom as emancipation introduced new hardships, insecurities, and humiliation. People who like to talk about how emancipation was such a great thing for ex-slaves, but they want to gloss over or completely ignore how slaves were treated after emancipation. If they were treated brutally, most of them were treated brutally while they were in chains. So you can imagine how they were treated after the chains were physically loosened. You have a lot of vindictive people in this world, especially when it comes to something they want. And when they're fearful, fear causes you to do evil things. So these people were accustomed to having people in chains and working for free. It's too numerous to count that I don't even think many people are being honest about how much money was made during slavery by forced free labor. When they saw that was going to come to an end, and they were so complacent and used to that system being in place intact, you can imagine what some of these people did. During the post-Civil War and Reconstruction era, a slave's fight for freedom turned into a mere fight for survival. The majority of slaves were released from their previous plantation penniless. Wages for African Americans also fluctuated in response to the perceived worth of that person, and manual labor was considered easily replaceable during a post-Civil War time period. With income being an issue, few ex-slaves had the ability to own land. According to the 1880 census, 1/5 of African Americans owned at least some of the land they farmed. However, these holdings were usually beset with debt, crippling African American owners in the long run. Johnson declared that before the war, Negroes did have a place to lie down at night and somewhere to eat when they got hungry in slavery time. Side note, I noticed that when upon researching these, slave narratives and such, I've noticed that a lot of black folks had no problem with calling themselves niggers. I mean, they said it like it was their names. That's how conditioned they were to seeing themselves so lowly, less than an animal, that they were used to calling one another, including themselves, niggers. I'm telling you, that slavery and what happened after and during did a number on black folks. This prevalent poverty among ex-slaves during the Reconstruction era resulted in a lack of nourishment and medical care, which in turn caused a high mortality rate for African Americans, especially the children. Illness left former slaves with the burden of unpaid medical bills or the inability to access proper medical care. Deficiencies caused African Americans to resort to the treatment of disease with herbal and home remedies. The 1900 census reveals 30 per 1,000 blacks died each year, as opposed to only 17 per 1,000 whites. Death as a result of poverty was not the only thing that affected a slave's life in the tough times of the post-Civil War era. Ex-slaves were weakened by a severe sense of isolation brought on by separation from their families. And sales of slaves, the death of owners, and the presentation of slaves as gifts during the pre-Civil War era were only some of the reasons for this division. Alienation and loneliness dampened the spirit of these slaves' newfound freedom and made the fight to survive that much harder. As whites saw African Americans as an imposition on normality as well as a threat to their dominance, they continued to make former slaves work for their freedom. Johnson stated in his narrative that since them times, many a negress has had it tough to make a living. Too, I know that is so too, 'cause I has been all along there. Johnson's experiences, along with so many others, shed light on the darker side of the emancipation after the Civil War. It has never been easy in this country for Black Americans, those called Black Americans. Matter of fact, it hasn't been easy in this world. In any continent. I can say every continent, there is some place, there is not one place I don't think a black person can go to and not experience the badge of slavery, which is racism. And it was done by design. I mean, because black folks, they kept them so broke and so poor that they didn't have the option of traveling like that. So after slavery, during slavery and after slavery, it was like a campaign. You know how these people, these politicians go around campaigning to get you to vote for them? Well, some people went around the world campaigning against us. That's why you have some people don't even know how to speak English. Prejudice. They know how to be prejudiced against people who look like me. Like, damn, your ass don't even know how to speak English, and you got the nerves to... it's been so savage. You know what tickles me? And not in a funny, oh, that was funny. In a sad, disturbing way. This bully campaign that's been going on for years. And I sit back and think about how black Americans have been treated for centuries in this country. It's been nothing but pure bullying, intimidation, cruelty at its worst. And yet, some folks had a nerve to talk about stop bullying. If you shouldn't have never started it. Black people been getting bullied since slavery and after. When whole towns were burnt down and the husbands, fathers dragged off into the woods and never seen again. Or if you did see him again, he was hanging from a tree, mutilated. All right. Yeah, I didn't have too much commentary while reading this tragedy of the past and present, because it's just sad. It's a sad situation. And then you look, like I said, you listen to some of these terrible politicians that say the things they say about slavery, just playing down slavery to a point where you should be imprisoned for your lies. And then you have people that don't have a sense enough to not be parrots and repeat what they say. And like, instead of repeating, if you have the ability to repeat what someone says, you have the ability to look it up and find out the truth. Instead of repeating what people say, go and look it up for yourself. And then you have these people, these heartless people that go and repeat these foul things that these prejudiced and racist politicians say. And then when you take the time out to research these things, and then you just be like, you are such a evil liar. And if slavery wasn't that bad as you say it is, why are you trying to erase it? It's not adding up. And it's up to people who have a conscience, not just people who look like me. It's up to people who have a conscience to tell the truth. And stop being scared to tell the truth. I don't do cowards. I really don't. I don't do cowards at all. I experienced a cowardice dog years ago. I was walking to school. I was in high school walking to school. I think I called myself trying to ditch, but I changed my mind. I cannot remember to this day why I changed my mind, but ended up walking to school. It was late, after 8 o'clock in the morning, probably between 8 and 9. It's a little old funky dog. That's probably why I don't like him. A little dog I heard it walking behind me, so I turned to look. It started barking at me, and I'm like, stumping my feet, get back. But I kept my eyes on him. So I'll walk a little bit, turn and look. And then every time I turn and look, it'll jump back, like run back from me. But I'm still keeping my eyes on it. Finally, I was like, okay, this dog ain't gonna do nothing. Got a little too cocky and beside myself. Just start walking. Because I'm late, so I'm trying to get to school. Little ass ran up and bit my ankle. I said, oh, I was so terrified. That's when they first started talking about I'm not about to say what was out there, what kind of disease or illness was rampant out there, because I went to school. I was so terrified, man. When the nurse came in, and it had just happened that morning, she came in late or something, and I was just like, ooh, bullet, just cold sweating, like, please help me. But it was nothing. It turned out nothing was wrong. I ended up getting a rabies shot. I got some kind of shot. My mother picked me up. I think she asked me what happened. I made up some fantastic story about being late, and she took me to the doctor to get a shot. My point was, I don't trust that dog. solidify why I do not trust cowards, coward dogs, and coward people. Because a coward person will eventually turn against you. You try to help. Have you ever tried to help people that were like bullied in school, and then they would end up doing something to turn against you, and you would be like, I was the only one that had your dumb back, and you gonna turn on me? That's why I don't deal with cowards. All right, I'm about to wrap this up. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you taking time out of your life to listen to this vid, and I hope you have a safe, blessed, peaceful day. Take care.